This time on Callahan's Garage, the hearse is out of the shop, it's back on the ground, and I do mean on the ground. Hey, I'm Callahan. Welcome to Callahan's Garage. So we got our whole little build series going on the hearse here. In the last video, we got the front air ride totally done. We got all of our air ride management built and installed. We got the front end going up and down. So if you haven't seen any of those videos, please go check them out and leave some love on them. But today we're going to keep working on the air ride on this, and we've got to finish up everything on the rear end of the car. All right, so we're in the back of the hearse, and in the last video, we got just enough work done on our rear end to determine that we are definitely going to have to do a frame notch. So we got our axle in place, we got our link bars built, we got our lower link bars mounted up and everything. We get the old cross member cut out, and now we're going to start working on the frame notch. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so as you can see here, we've got our axle in place, we've got our lower link bars in place down here, and the axle is currently sitting right up against our frame rail, and the car is still not as low as we want it to be. So basically what we're going to attempt to do is take this frame section here and raise it up. So the way that we're going to do that is we're going to make a plate that comes up, across, and then back down, and that's going to allow us to remove this whole section and give us a little more travel on our axle here and get our ride height to where we want it. Okay, so for our frame notch, we're basically going to have to whip up a handful of these plates that are going to sandwich on each side of our frame, and then we'll box in the top and the bottom side of these, and this will basically create us a new frame rail. You can buy plates like these for all different sorts of vehicles online from various companies that are already CNC cut out and everything. They're super nice, ready to go. Unfortunately, there isn't really an option for a 73 hearse. So I made me a little template. I went to work, cut out some nice heavy 1/4" plates. I got 4 of them here. This one I've already got our little bin put in it. I've got it cleaned up, ready to go in. So we need to get our other 3 cleaned up, and then we can start fitting them up on the car. Okay, so we got all of our frame notch pieces cut out and cleaned up, and I've gone ahead and I've taken this one. I've already got it bent. I've got it clamped up here in place, and what I'm going to do, I'm just going to put a couple of tacks on this to hold it in place. That way I can take my next piece, bend it, and get it fit up. Okay, so we got both of our frame notch pieces in place up here, and you may be thinking like, Callahan, why did you make this frame notch piece so long? Our axle's way up here. Well, once this frame section is gone and this thing airs completely out, remember our axle is going to sit right up under our frame rail here. So we're not going to have space there for our whole bag setup. So we've got enough length on this frame rail section for this bag to sit behind the axle a little bit. So we'll have this mount plate up here, we'll have our cross member to support all this stuff, and it's going to kind of occupy this space back here and still give us that full compression for this thing to air all the way out and give us that extra 3 inches or so to really get this thing hammered down on the ground. So next thing we need to do, we need to make some templates, we need to cut out some pieces, and we're going to get all this boxed in. Okay, so we got our rear box piece cut out, tacked in. Just do the same thing for the top and the front side of our frame notch now, and then we'll be able to take this out and fully weld it up. Alright, so we've got most of our frame notch fabbed up here. We got all of our top box plates fabbed up and tacked in place. So now I'm going to weld as much of this notch together as I can, then I'm going to take it back off the frame, fully weld it out, and then we'll put it back on and weld it in place to the frame. Okay, so I was able to get to all the welds on this thing. We got it fully welded up, and once it cools down, we'll pop this back off, we'll clean up all of our frame section, and we'll weld it onto the frame. In the meantime, I'm going to jump over to the other side and start getting it cleaned up. Alright, so we went ahead and got this side all welded up as well. So while this is cooling down, now I'm going to jump back over to this side. I'm going to mark everywhere where this needs to be welded to our existing frame. I'll cut my couple of tacks loose, take this back off, get our frame all cleaned up, and then we can do the final weld on this thing to our frame here. Okay, so we got our frame notch piece back in. We got it cleaned up a little bit. We got all of our frame section cleaned up. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to come and weld all the way around this thing and get our frame notch piece welded to our frame. And then what we're going to do is come in and we will cut this whole frame section out right here. So this will go away and all we'll be left with is this frame that is now Z'd up with plenty of clearance for our axle to come all the way up in here. Well, we almost finished welding this side up. I got one weld left and my welding bottle of shielding gas runs out on me. So we're going to go pick up a new bottle and we'll get this finished up. Maybe this afternoon, maybe tomorrow. I don't know.
Perfect.
And just like that, we got our old frame section cut out here. So you can see old frame section, new frame section is Z'd up and notched around our old frame rail here. And that's going to give us that additional, 3.5 inches or so of drop. So currently our axle's sitting about where it's going to be on ride height. And you can see, we've got about 10 inches of compression here. So that's going to get us that little bit extra drop and get us sitting all the way down on the ground where we want it to be. So now we're going to jump back over to the other side. We'll pull this off, get it cleaned up, get it fully welded in, and then get this side cut out just like that side. And then we'll come back in and we'll box in the bottom sides of our new frame section here. All right, well, we are finally back on the hearse. It has been a hectic couple of weeks. I've only had like a couple hours here and there to actually get out here and work on this thing. I've been super busy at work and family. We have all kinds of stuff going on. But we got our frame notches all boxed in and fully welded up. I got my new cross member fabbed up. So we've got 3/16 wall square tubing. As you can see, it kind of jogs up to clearance our front section of our differential and our drive shaft. So that's going to work out nicely. Also got our upper link bar mounts fabbed up. So I've got to fully weld all of this. I need to box in the front side of our link bar mounts. Once we get all of this fully welded out, then we can finalize our axle position and finally weld our lower bag mounts and our upper bag mounts and our suspension bridge in here, and we will be that close to being done with our suspension. All right, well, got our cross member fully welded in. I've got my axle position totally finalized now. I ended up making some new link bars and stuff. I just wasn't super pleased with where the axle ended up sitting after we got the frame notch and everything done. So we got new link bars, we got heim joints on here now. We got this thing kicked back about 1.5 inches from where it was sitting. So it's going to allow us to clear the corner of this frame notch a little bit better and get it sitting exactly where we want it. Also ended up having to trim a little bit of the body above the drive shaft and a little bit of the body outboard near where our frame notch is. So now we've got our completely aired out ride height, totally perfect, where our frame rails are going to sit right on the ground where we want them. So now I can finish boxing in my link bar mounts, and then tomorrow we're going to get out here and we're going to weld our cross members and our bag mounts in. Okay, so we've done a bunch of boring fab work. I cut out all these little plates to box in all our link bar mounts. So the link bar mounts on our axle are boxed in, the link bar mounts on our cross members up here are boxed in. Once everything is mocked up, we'll pull the axle back out and we'll fully weld everything. But for now, we are finally to the fun part where we can start to get the bags mounted in here. So you can see I've got my upper bag mounts tacked in place, and I've got my rear crossbar tacked in place. Our front crossbar is going to have to come out and kind of jog around our link bar mounts here. So I'm going to get those pieces cut and notched and all that good stuff. We'll get them tacked in place. Then we can hang our bag mounts in here and finally put our lower bag mounts onto the axle. So now we've got one of our front crossbars made. You can see we had to put a miter joint on here. I've got this side coped and I got everything tacked in, and I've got my other one prepped, ready to go. So like I said, we've got a miter joint here. It'd be nice to have a bent radius on this, but this is 1/4 inch wall tubing. My tubing bender is not gonna bend this, so we're going with a miter joint. It's beveled, it's fully welded, it's gonna be totally fine. And then we've got a nice little cope on here to fit up to our rear bar. So this is all ready, and we can get it fit and tacked in here right where we need it. And now that we've got both of our side sections tacked in, I'm going to jack the axle the rest of the way up, and then I'm going to put a crossbar in between these to link these two together, and we'll make sure that it's going to clear our differential cover. And that'll tie all of this in nicely, and it'll be super strong to hold all of our bags. Lower bag plates. And there we go, we got our lower bag plate tacked in place, mocked up. We got our full collapse on our bags. These bags collapse to just under 3 inches, so we got a 3-inch gap here, so we still got a little bit of wiggle room. And you can see our axles all the way bottomed out on our C-notch, so we're going to be able to lay out all the way just like we want it. So now I'm going to make up some gussets for the bottom of this. We'll get this all tacked in place. We're going to box in the bottom sides of these two, and then we'll do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so we got our rear bags fully mounted up. We got both of our lower bag plates welded on. We got our gussets tacked in place. And once I take the axle back out and we fully weld the inside of this, I'm gonna box these in as well, so they'll be nice and super strong. But bags cycle fully, we get our full compression like we want, so we'll get our full drop ride height. Next thing we need to do is figure out where in the world we are going to mount our rear shocks. Okay, so I think I've got a plan for where we're going to put our shocks. So because our bags are sitting behind the axle, there's really nowhere to put the shocks other than forward of the axle. And I think we're going to be able to fit them right down between this little pocket between our bag and our link bar and our frame rail here. So I've got a set of these just generic KYB 1/2-inch eyelet mount shocks that I've had floating around, and it looks like they're going to fit right down in here nicely. So what I've done is I just took a pair of generic mount brackets that I had, cut them down into a little mount shape here, and these are going to be able to go right on my frame rail. Our shock will kick right down through this hole, and we'll be able to make our lower mount tie into that lower bag bracket, and everything should strengthen itself and tie in nicely, and these should work really well. Okay, so we got our shock mounts finished up. You can see we got the top ones all tacked in place. I boxed in the top of the mount, which is probably overkill, but whatever. And then we got just a simple plate with a gusset on the bottom for our lower mount. Should work out nicely. So I think that finishes up all the fab work for the rear axle. So now we just need to get the axle out. We can fully weld everything, and then we'll paint it, we'll clean it, and we'll put it all back in. All right, so we got our axle out up here on the bench. We got a bunch of welding to do on this. We got our link brackets got to be fully welded. Our bag brackets got to be fully welded. Our shock brackets got to be fully welded. We'll get all of that done. We'll get this thing cleaned up, painted. We got a bunch of welding to do in the car. We're gonna get all that fully welded, cleaned up, painted, and then we will be able to do some final assembly. Alright, so you can see we got our frame section all cleaned up and painted back here. We use the Rust-Oleum truck bed liner on all the frame section, our cross members and everything back here. As a truck bed liner, it totally sucks, but as a frame paint or suspension part paint, holds up really well, nice texture black look. And we got our axle cleaned up, painted, ready to go too. Still need to sandblast and paint our differential cover, but we still got to do a gear oil service on this thing once it's installed, so we'll get that later on. But we're ready to swing this thing back up under here and we can do all of our final install. Alright, so we got our link bars all back together and painted. We got our airbags ready to go. We just got our brakes in yesterday. We got a bunch of new hardware. So we're ready to do all of our final assembly on the rear end of the hearse and get this thing back on the ground. So cue the time lapse. Okay, well, we got our axle fully installed. We got all of our link bars in. We got our bags hooked up. I got our airlines kind of temporarily hooked up. I need to get a little bit more airline to get them routed exactly the way I want to. But I've gotten the brakes all together. I've got my drums all cleaned up and painted. We can throw these on here. Now we can throw our wheels on here, and we were almost ready to sit this thing on the ground. Alright, so as you can see, we got the rear end sitting on the ground now. Just finished up with the front. We got the front brakes all bled out and everything. I ordered a nice new set of Willwood calipers for these, and they did not clear our Dayton. So we got the trusty old cast iron units cleaned up, painted, everything reassembled, bled out. Now we're ready to put the wheels back on and sit the whole car on the ground. folks, there it is. Out of the shop in the daylight for the first time in months. We got the brakes done, we got the suspension all wrapped up, and as you can see, this thing is on the ground. We're still sitting on our exhaust up in the front. We still got a bunch of other stuff we need to do on this thing. We gotta get the gas tank back into it. We gotta put the interior back together. We gotta build an exhaust. So we got a bunch of work still to do, so make sure you stick around. But for right now, I'm gonna hose this thing off. It is absolutely filthy from being in the shop since like October. So we're gonna rinse this thing off, sweep the shop out, and I will see you guys next time.